I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by Young Harris College, the Richard Russell Library, and the University of Georgia. Our guest is Glenn Anthony, noted Georgia political reporter and well-known lobbyist for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you very much.
You know, I told the people over the university that I was looking forward to this conversation because you and I are contemporaries in Georgia politics.
Right.
We came along at the same time. We were both journalists, and we have had many of the same friends for many years. But before we get to that, let's talk about Glenn Anthony and Lenoir City, Tennessee.
Well, Bob, I was born in Lenoir City, 1924, in the depths of the Great Depression. And I'm still haunted by some of those terrible years that I spent there. But I graduated from high school in 1943 and went into the Navy and spent most of my career down the South Pacific on destroyer escort. I came back to the States after the war, and I went on the GI Bill of Rights at the University of Tennessee, majored in journalism, and I had a friend, a fraternity brother there, who had an opportunity to go down to Florida State University to get some coursework that he couldn't get at the University of Tennessee. So he came back to Knoxville and with this glowing story about that campus down there. He said, "You can't believe this." So they got 1,500 men and about 5,000 ladies. It was prior to the Florida State University, it was called Florida State College for Women. And then they made it coeducational in 1946 to take the overflow from the University of Florida from the veterinarians, the vets that were coming in there. So I said, well, I've got to go down and check on that. So I spoke to my dad and mother about it, and Dad said, well, how are you going to get down there? I said, well, I guess I'll ride a bus or hitchhike. So he said, well, okay, I'll give you a bus fare. So he gave me the bus fare. I went down. I liked the campus down there, everything. So I came back to Knoxville, and at that time I decided that I was going to definitely go. And I asked the university to transfer my transcript down there, which they did. And in so doing, I lost a lot of credits. So I finally graduated down in 1952. But prior to that, I met a lady named Janet Anderson. She was a wonderful, talented lady. She was a violinist. She was born and raised in New York City. And her family moved down to Titusville, Florida, where her grandfather had been a successful land developer down there. So she came to Florida State, and that's where I met her. And we got married while we were still in college. And the financial situation was so bleak that she went back to Titusville and worked in a dental office there to help me get through college. So I did. I graduated in journalism, and my first job was at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That's where the hydrogen bomb was developed. So I stayed there, worked on a company newspaper there for about a couple of years, I guess. And Janet wanted to go back to Florida, where her family was living in Palm Beach County. So I went back to Palm Beach and got a job on the Palm Beach Post-Times. We stayed there a couple of years, and then from there we went, I came back to Knoxville. And at that time, then I was hired by United Press International. They sent me to Nashville, there a year or so, and then they sent me down to Montgomery, Alabama. And I was there when Martin Luther King began the bus boycott I was there when Rosa Parks, who was one of the main movers and shakers in Montgomery, refused to give up her seat and moved to the back of the bus. So I stayed there for a couple of years, and then I was transferred to Atlanta, where I worked in United Press International as a Capitol reporter. Stayed there for 2 years. I was hired by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce to lobby for the business interests. They had about 5,000 members in Georgia. I was recommended to the job there by a fellow named Mike Cheatham. And Mike was a very fine young man, and he had spent some time there, and the Coca-Cola company hired him. There's an old war horse named Marvin Davis that hired Mike to go to Coca-Cola and work in governmental affairs there. So Mike introduced me to the Georgia Chamber of Walter Cates, an old war horse, and they hired me, and I spent 18 and a half years there with them. And I put together some governmental affairs tours there. They had, when I joined the Chamber in 1959, they had a pre-legislative forum that they'd go around the state for about 10 days. They were taking they would take a lawyer who was skilled in labor relations, and they'd take a businessman along to talk about issues. So that was 1959. I went on the first tour, and when we got back, after it was finished, got back, and I talked to Cates. I said, why don't we get legislators and governmental officials go on this tour? So the executive committee okayed it. So the first tour that I took was 1960 with Carl Sanders. He's floor leader for Governor Ernest Vandiver. And the House floor leader was a fellow named Frank Twitty, and from Grady County. So that was a very successful trip. So the next year, we put that together, and several lobbyists had heard about the success of it, so they started signing up. And we would work with the local chambers of commerce, and they'd put the program together on it. And then we'd bring the governmental affairs people in there. And they ranged from Senator Herman Talmadge to Governor Lester Maddox. And we had, during that period, would have a member of Congress. I think the first one to go on the tour with us was Phil Landrum, North Georgia. He was one of the authors of the Landrum-Griffin bill. So we after that program, we had one there called let's see here, what was that? Yeah, congressional dinner. We put that on each year, and now the chamber had been putting this together, and they would invite the congressmen, senators, members of the House for an evening, for a dinner meeting. So I suggested the next year, I said, why don't we invite the staff people too? They're the people that I have to deal with. So then we enlarged it, and it became a very, very big dinner. We'd have sometimes 500 people there. The people, the business people in Georgia, they would come up, and they helped us with the expenses of increasing the size of this dinner. It became a very successful program. But I think that, and we had another program there at the Georgia Chamber that I got involved in. It was called Stay and See Georgia. We set up a travel department. And the ladies in charge of that, Moselle Christian, she invited top travel writers from around the state, around the country, to come in and see Georgia on about a week's tour of the state. That became very successful. It was copied in other states. We also had a very popular Stay and See Georgia, the Star Student program, where we would select the star student, and then the star student in turn would select the teacher, his favorite teacher. So one of the offshoots of that was I had a friend at Pan American Airways. He was vice president for the South. And I said, is there anything you can do for us? He said, yes, I can. I can give you and the student a trip anywhere Pan American services. And so we took that, and that was then for the next 10 years we had that. And it was my duty, and I emphasize duty, to accompany this young student all over Europe, South America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, went to all those countries. France, London, Paris, Rome. So I had that duty for 10 years, and so that was a good addition to my program.
Glenn, before we get too far away from it, let's go back to Montgomery.
No, okay.
You covered the civil rights movement in Montgomery, so you knew Dr. King.
Knew him very well. After he made when the boycott first began, I got to know him pretty well. And after he started making some big news headlines, the Atlanta office of United Press International called me and said, see if you can get an in-depth interview with this young preacher over there. And so I called him up. He said, yes, come on out to the house and we'll talk about what I have in mind. So I went out there. I spent an hour more with him. And this fellow was quoting poetry. He was quoting the philosophers. And he was a very bright man. And I went back and told Atlanta, I said, you're going to hear from this fella. He's got some talent. So, we went on to win a Nobel, what he did for the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. But that was a great part of my life during those periods, that 2 years I spent there during that bus boycott. But, I saw him even when he won the Nobel Prize, I saw him a couple of times. He always remembered me and always very friendly. So I knew that he was going to make some news, and which he did worldwide.
So you came then to Atlanta to cover the Capitol when Marvin Griffin was governor.
That's right.
Marvin, of course, was a staunch segregationist and a very colorful man. Do you remember much about him?
Well, he had a great sense of humor, and as I was a reporter, we'd come in his office, maybe half a dozen of us, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and it was hard to get anything out of him because he would turn our questions into a humorous answer. So, the press, of course, really hit him hard. He had some things going on in his administration that the public needed to know about. So we reporters, we got out and tried to cover it all. And but even through all of those bleak days when he was going through this somebody called an assassination of his character, and then somebody said, "Well, what character does he have?" But anyway, he had his brother Cheney. He was in the office, and he's a hatchet man. I mean, he did all the gory stuff that had to be done in administration. We had an old gentleman there named Hamilton that was the Secretary of the Treasury. And we had a fellow in the purchasing department. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, it was a very colorful administration. That's the part that I remember most about it.
He called you gentlemen Jorees.
Joree. Well, yes, he did. He called all the reporters Jorees. And the Joree is a small bird which traipses around in meadows and picks up the droppings from the cattle and so forth. So Marvin Griffin put us in with him. So I started from that. After I joined the Georgia Chamber, I decided to organize a golf tournament for all the news people in Atlanta and anywhere else in the state. We called it the Joree Open. And that program we carried for about 10, 12 years. And we had all the top journalists in Atlanta, TV, print journalism. We had them all. They all came to the programs. And that was a very good.
Were you covering the Capitol when Governor Griffin and Lieutenant Governor Vandiver got into a big fight over money that Griffin wanted for rural roads?
Yes, I was. I was there at that, yeah.
What do you remember about that?
A little bit vague on that. Trying to remember the name of the highway department.
Roger Lawson.
Roger Lawson from Hawkinsville, Georgia, I believe.
Right.
And I think that bill was killed, as I remember.
Right.
And yes, I was there for that.
Well, despite all of his trouble with corruption, Griffin turned out to be a fairly progressive governor.
Yes, he did. Yes,
Don't you think?
He had some good points and some good traits. But now Ernest Vandiver came in. He was a quality individual, a fine man, a fine person, man of great character. And we've just gone through those years with the Marvin Griffin administration. And it was really a bright day in Georgia when Ernest Vandiver came in. And he came in at a time during the integration movement. He said he would abide by the will of the people in Georgia and the South, that no school in Georgia would be integrated. But then he backed off on that, as you know, and the schools were segregated.
And the University of Georgia.
That's right, University of Georgia. And let's see, I'm trying to remember the name. Can't remember right now.
Of the students?
Yeah.
Hamilton Holmes
Hamilton Holmes, yes.
was one, and the other was the young lady, Charlene Hunter.
Charlene Hunter, right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the first students to integrate the University of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Griffin ran again following Vandiver's term against a young state senator from Augusta, Carl Sanders, who defeated him. Most people think that Griffin lost the race because of charges of corruption, but there are others who think that Sanders just out-campaigned him and won. What do you recall about that race?
A little bit vague on that.
Some people think that the election of Carl Sanders in 1962 was one of the real turning points in Georgia history.
Absolutely. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Sanders was the floor leader in the Senate and Twitty in the House. And there was one quality that Sanders had. Now, when we would take this large group around the state to speak, the congressman and a member of the Georgia legislature or the Georgia government, and we had a lot of lobbyists in the group. And after each evening session, we'd all gather in a room somewhere and drink a lot of whiskey, tell a lot of lies. But the one person who did not attend those evening sessions was Carl Sanders. He would always go to his room after the meeting, and he'd be prepared for the next meeting. We had a lot of times breakfast, noon, and dinner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And he was very well prepared in his statements that he made, and it was very obvious then that he was a serious guy. And so Frank Twitty, he was a much better speaker than Twitty. And Twitty came out with a he called Sanders my short-shirted friend. And that didn't go over too well with Sanders, but anyway, that's what it was, short-shirted friend.
Actually, Governor Sanders was the first governor that we had, as I recall, who had ties to Washington. Most of our governors had always cursed and not gotten along with the federal government, but Sanders became a very good friend of Lyndon Johnson. And as a result, it was a great help to Georgia from the federal government.
Another thing Carl Sanders was instrumental in was getting the sports in this city. Your professional teams, Sanders was one of the leaders in that. And that's few people know about that, but he was really big in that program.
He had what I guess was called a moderate approach to the race issue during that period.
Yes, he did, yes.
And a lot of people think that when he ran for re-election in 1970, that hurt him when he was defeated by Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I really am not, Bob. But I just don't know.
Let's talk for a minute about lobbying. What makes a good lobbyist?
Well, number one is honesty. You've got to deal with these legislators in a complete, upfront, in dealing with them. You can't come on and tell them 2 or 3 different tales and then have to come back and say, well, I'm sorry. So I would say honesty is the number one. I lobbied there for more than 20 years with the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia Forestry Association. And I can say that at no period during that time did I ever have any problems, individual problems with the legislators. And I felt, I think they recognized me because the House representatives commended me for my honesty and integrity, passed a resolution. The Senate did likewise. And Senator Bill English from Swainsboro, Georgia, introduced the resolution in the state Senate, commended me for my honesty and integrity. So those were quite a highlight of my career there. And I was told by some of the old timers there that they'd never heard of a lobbyist in the history of the state ever being commended for the service. So that was a very proud moment for me and my family.
Well, you deserved it. But on the other hand, you took a lot of flack also.
Yes, I did. We had one incident, went all the way to the top to Governor Jimmy Carter. He had Elliot Levitas, a representative of DeKalb County, to introduce a bill which was called Consumer Protection Legislation. And so after we analyzed it, we had a stable of accountants and tax lawyers and so forth. And they said, this is a killer bill for business. And so I rallied the troops in, and we killed the bill. And so after that, Jimmy Carter, in a press conference a few days later, he called me the most damaging lobbyist in the state because I'd killed a bill that would have benefited the people of Georgia. So after that commendation from the governor, my board of directors said, "Charge on, Anthony. You're doing your job, and you're doing it supremely."
They called you Tiger.
They called me Tiger, as a nickname.
Well, there must be a story behind that.
Well, I when I got onto a project, got onto a bill, what I charged. I saw it to conclusion. I would see that we'd get the bills passed or killed. And I was unrelenting in the times that I was involved in those legislation, and I wouldn't give up. So that was a honor bestowed upon me by my fellow lobbyists. They call me the Tiger.
Now they call you Colonel.
Colonel, that's right, yeah.
How did you get that rank?
I got that, well, as you know, the governors there, they have honorary colonels that they hand out. But the one who really, Lester Maddox, started calling me the Colonel. And every time I'd go in his office, I'd say, "Colonel, what can I do for you today?" And so he was quite a showman, as everybody knows.
Let's explore for a minute, Glenn, if you will, the mechanics of lobbying. For example, what is the first thing a lobbyist does when he finds out that a bill that affects him is about to be introduced?
Well, what I did, and I assume most of the lobbyists did, they go back to their employer and sit down. Like I would go back, if we had a bill that I could get my hands on, I'd take it back to my office. We'd rally the lawyers and the accountants and so forth. They would study the bill, and they would come with some good concrete evidence of what it do to business. Now, we were not unreasonable over there in representing the business, but most of the time, most of my energies were expended on killing bills, not passing bills. Mm-hmm. And we would take down the bills that would affect the business community.
But sometimes you might settle for amendments.
Amendments?
To the bill.
Yes, we did. Occasionally we'd settle for one.
And you'd go to the sponsor and suggest those amendments.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what if the sponsor rejected them?
Well, if he did, we'd just go ahead and kill the bill.
You know, it seems, I guess, that to most people that lobbying work is done there in the Capitol, but that's not it, is it?
Oh, no.
Tell us about what you do during the interim.
All right. I had a plan every summer. I would get out, I'd go to every legislator in the Georgia General Assembly, and I'd go see him in his hometown. I visited with him. I might take him to lunch, or I might take him to dinner. And I went every legislator I saw between sessions on trips around, and that was impressive to these people. Going to up to Young Harris or going to Walker County, and so that was well received by these people. This fellow from Atlanta thinks enough about me to drive 200 miles or 300, 500 miles, and so that was a good program that I put together.
Representing the Chamber of Commerce, you obviously at the same time represented a lot of the businesses who had their own lobbyists. How did you interact with those?
Well, that was we generally, if a lobbyist company was a member of the Georgia Chamber, we would join in with him if he asked for our support, mm-hmm. and we didn't take it on unless he asked us to. Mm-hmm. But
I bet you remember when there were only 4 or 5 lobbyists around the Capitol.
Yes, yeah, 4 or 5. I guess now you got
2,000.
2,000 or more. Yeah. But I remember that the Southern Bell had a good lobbyist, one of the old timers, Bill Bryant.
Bill Bryant. I remember Bill.
Yeah. And
Bob Simonette.
Bob Simonette, yes. He was Georgia Power Company. He was a very fine man and was well respected by the members of the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, I can't recall the names, but we had a small group.
Glenn Phillips.
Glenn Cookie Phillips. That was the nickname they gave him. Cookie Phillips was, he ran at the Grady Hotel. They had the speaker stayed there, Speaker George L. Smith. And most evenings you could go there and they'd have a liquor room set up. And everybody would travel, get in there and compare notes and drink some Jack Daniels. But that was a good program. And so we always kept the liquor bottles filled up.
I think I might have asked you this question, but I'd like to rephrase it and ask you this. What does it take to be a good lobbyist? Personality?
Well, that's part of it, and a sense of honesty. There's no question about that. And we had some lobbyists over there that I didn't want to spend much time with, but anyway, the members of the General Assembly, they soon they feel they know what's going on with these people, and so they just
what makes a good public servant?
Well, Bob, that's a pretty tough question. Again, honesty, that's number one. And I would say that's a number one issue.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to those who criticize lobbyists and accuse them of being something other than Sunday school teachers?
Let's see, how about rephrasing that?
How do you respond to criticism of the profession of lobbying?
Well, that's a pretty hard question. Most of the lobbyists, I would say, now working these days, most of them are honest people, and they want to do what's right, but they've got to represent their clients, they've got to represent their companies. Mm-hmm. But the bad ones, the bad lobbyists, they can't make it. They're ineffective, and they get the reputation. That's damaging to them.
Getting back to the pre-legislative forums, which were so important at that time, tell us about some of the participants, and if you recall some of the issues they discussed on these tours.
Well, there's a wide range of subjects, and a lot of times people in North Georgia might have a different set of ideas than the ones in South Georgia. But they had taxation was always a big issue. They had, I don't know, that was a big one.
Let me ask you this question. Tell us about some of the most effective legislators that you remember.
Well, yes, a former state senator named Roy Lambert from Madison, Georgia, was an outstanding state senator. Very honest, very compelling man. Also had Representative Harold Clark, who later went to the Supreme Court of Georgia. A very fine statesman. He's a man that who stood by his principles, could not be swayed, but he'd always be up front with you when you were dealing with him. Those two come to mind as being the exemplary good legislators.
You worked over there during the famous feud between Lieutenant Governor Zell Miller and Speaker Murphy. How did you fare during that period?
Well, personally, I did all right. I didn't, I dealt with both of them, and I'd be up front. I would tell them if I was dealing with Murphy or vice versa, and
Clint, as you look back over those years you spent over at the Capitol, what do you think was your greatest accomplishment?
My greatest accomplishment? Well, representing the business of Georgia. That was seeing their programs enacted in the Georgia legislature. Killing the programs that would be not in the best interest. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things.
Mm-hmm. What was your biggest disappointment?
you know, I really cannot. I did not have a disappointment, to tell you the truth. Over the years, I pretty much had it my way, putting it pretty bluntly, but I didn't have any real disappointments. I feel like it would serve the business community of Georgia.
Well, I think I can say without fear of contradiction that if all lobbyists were like you, we wouldn't have the headlines we read far too often in the newspapers today. I want to ask you this final question. What advice do you have for those who might want to become professional lobbyists?
I would say that it'd have to have a bent toward the government or legislature. Personality is very good. Personality, honesty, and
Communicative skills, do they figure?
very important, yes, very important.
How is the best way to communicate with a legislator? Is it privately in his home or in his office, or is it the famous 3 martini lunches?
I did a lot of those activities. I spent a lot of time at the Commerce Club with those so-called 3 martini lunches, and also I did a lot of business in the halls. And the evenings you'd go out and see these good folks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Was it difficult to change votes when you needed them?
no,
Was it?
no. I was very successful in my career over there. I cannot remember a single instant where I fell flat on my face on an issue. So I feel very good about my career there.
Well, you've had
those two, I'm very, very proud of those two recommendations that the House and the Senate made on my behalf, commended me for my honesty and integrity. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the pros over there said they'd never heard of anything like this, a lobbyist being honored. Mm-hmm. Most of them are looked upon as lurking in the dark and with their top coats and their top hat pulled down.
wearing those Italian suits.
That's right, wearing those $1,500 Italian suit and silk underwear.
Well, Glenn, it's been a pleasure having you. And I want to thank you on behalf of Young Harris College and the Richard Russell Library, the University of Georgia, and myself for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. And you know, we've been old friends since 1957.
That's right.
So it goes back a long way.
Been through a lot together.
Yeah, surely have.
Shared a lot of good friends.
Absolutely.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.